The first Hamburg Sustainability Conference is starting now. Please welcome to the stage the first mayor of the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg, Peter Tschentscher.
Sehr geehrter Herr Bundeskanzler, Exzellenzen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Herzlich willkommen im Rathaus der Freien und Hansestadt Hamburg zur Eröffnung der ersten Hamburg Sustainability Conference.
More than 100 countries are represented at the conference, represented by the heads of state and government ministers, ambassadors, and other members of the diplomatic and consular corps. I also welcome the representatives of international organizations and the participants from politics, business, science, and civil society. Hamburg is home to people from 190 nations. It is an honor for our city that the international community should come together here to discuss strategies and projects for a sustainable, better future for us all. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and increasing global crises and wars, the implementation of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals adopted in 2015 and renewed in 2023 has stalled. In a world that has recognized the urgency of climate and environmental protection, of a sustainable economy and way of life for people, and the fight against social inequality, the international community must act together. Business and society, they have to act together, because global goals can only be achieved through global partnership. The Hamburg Sustainability Conference aims to provide a framework, an independent forum for discussion and exchange of experience, for new concepts, ideas, initiatives, multilateral alliances, partnerships, and cooperation. The HSC program is dedicated to three core questions: how to make investment in sustainable development more attractive, secure, and scalable; how can the international financial architecture be made more equitable and more effective in terms of sustainability; how can the potential of major transformation processes, such as the transition to renewable energy or digitization, be harnessed in the spirit of the UN Sustainability Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, more than half of the world's population live in cities, in urban areas. They consume 80% of the world's energy. They produce 70% of greenhouse gas emissions and generate more than half of its waste. But they're also the centers of social and technological progress. They combine economic strength, scientific excellence, and innovative power. This is why global metropolises have a special responsibility to bear, but they also have the potential to lead the way, together with politics, science, and civil society, to assume a pioneering role and work out solutions for a globally sustainable future. Hamburg is ready to do that. The development of our city, the economic strength, prosperity, and quality of life of our citizens for centuries have been based on the port, on trade, on the good relations with all continents, and international cooperation, supported by a globally networked economy, science, and 100 consulates. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamburg is also referred to as Germany's gateway to the world. With the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, the city of Hamburg wants to contribute beyond its borders to achieving the sustainability goals of the UN. I'd like to thank you for having come here, and I'd like to thank the co-initiators of the HSC, the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and the Michael Otto Foundation for their commitment. I wish you all a successful conference, many fresh ideas and contacts, interesting discussions, and a pleasant stay in Hamburg. Thank you ever so much.
Please welcome the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, Achim Steiner.
Sehr geehrter Herr Bundeskanzler, sehr geehrter Erster Bürgermeister, and here I switch into English because coming today as I am as the head of the United Nations Development Program, I join all the visitors who have arrived here in Hamburg, this beautiful city, the gateway, as we just heard from the first mayor of Germany, to the world. And I, in particular, want to recognize their excellencies, presidents, prime ministers, honorable ministers, my dear colleagues, the heads of international organizations, civil society, CEOs, essentially the dream team, so to speak, that as co-initiators we had thought about when the idea of the Hamburg Sustainability Conference was first born. It is an immense privilege to welcome you, together with our partners, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation, the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg, the Michael Otto Foundation, who in his own right and life has led so many of the innovative ideas. Michael, thank you for making this also a part of your legacy. And we in the United Nations Development Program. Indeed, Hamburg, with a rich maritime history and an ambitious plan to become carbon neutral by the year 2040, Hamburg does exemplify the intersection between tradition and modernity. And if you only needed a reminder, what a wonderful place in which to be welcomed, not only this hall here, but indeed the city. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today our global community finds itself at a crossroads. We sense it every morning, every day, every evening when we watch the news. One path leading us more and more towards isolation and confrontation, but also the other towards a future built on cooperation, unity and sustainability. The Hamburg Sustainability Conference, in the way that we conceived it together, is an effort by the global community to help us choose a pathway of unity and cooperation. It is an effort to build the innovative alliances needed to accelerate the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals in the wake also of the groundbreaking Pact of the Future, adopted by the UN General Assembly just a few days ago, and a timely reminder that despite all our differences, despite all the divisions, despite all the conflicts, actually the world knows it is bound to work together to address the issues that lie before us. Multilateral cooperation is not dead. It is struggling in a world full of conflicts. But to those who thought that there is no room to think forward, I hope Hamburg will be a further affirmation of precisely the opposite. In particular, the Hamburg Sustainability Conference has a vital role to play in imagining what sustainable futures can look like, leaning into cutting-edge R&D. You will have some amazing workshops at this meeting that truly are a glimpse, not of the future in science fiction terms, but of the future that people are working on right now, and they need our support. But also from governance to finance and beyond, because we know that finance is a central issue. And amongst us are some of the leaders of the major international financial institutions, but also of the financial system at large. At the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, we are exploring these signals of change via our Strategy and Futures team and an extraordinary accelerator labs network that we have built up, which works with grassroots innovators now in 125 countries. We are learning from those closest to the problem, but also with the greatest authority to think about the solutions. For instance, we are seeing how technologies like artificial intelligence are changing lives and allowing governments to address issues like nature loss. Yet the benefits of AI are not spread evenly. We know this, and to address this, we must support countries to invest in their digital public infrastructure and close the digital divide. Opportunities abound, but so are the risks that we are addressing ourselves to here in Hamburg. We also know that inclusive governance, giving people real voice and agency, fosters trust and cooperation. It also leads to more equitable climate action. UNDP's climate promise is ensuring that young people and marginalized communities have a meaningful say in their country's climate pledges, the so-called NDCs, and therefore their futures. These are not just documents, they are expressions of sovereignty, of how each country individually, but ultimately collectively, can advance our response to the climate challenge. The Hamburg Sustainability Conference can also facilitate partnerships that transcend what are sometimes very established public-private, north-south distinctions. Yes, there are many differences amongst us. We come with many different legacies, but also opportunities. Our hope is that, especially also in the context of our international financial system, it is the ideas that will drive the investments of the future and ultimately allow us to deliver on those sustainable development goals. And let me just say one word, and Chancellor Scholz, you will also, having just been to New York, empathize with this. We often talk about the SDGs not being met in terms of their targets and indicators. But hidden behind that very simple statistic lies actually a much more complex story. We are advancing on virtually all of these goals in virtually all of the countries at different paces. We are making progress, just not in the way that we had envisaged before a pandemic hit us, before a financial crisis hit us, before conflicts and crises and wars are happening all around us in a way we have not seen since the Second World War. So let us not lose either sight of the SDGs nor of the fact that in every country extraordinary innovations from government but also the private sector and civil society are in a sense keeping that window of opportunity alive. And Hamburg, following on a Pact of the Future, is a workshop in which those who are actually making these advances can come together to draw, first of all, inspiration from one another, but also support. We must also question how we can reframe relief, debt relief, not as something that is offered to developing countries, but rather as a co-investment in our ability to advance together. We are struggling in our current financial system, as the Secretary General has repeatedly called for, in addressing some of the dysfunctionalities we find there. Without addressing financing, we cannot advance together, and indeed we will find ourselves being perhaps driven more apart by the contradictions of one side demanding and the other one unable to engage. Indeed, multilateralism is the means by which the world retains its ability to talk to each other and to think beyond today. In a world of splintered truth and diminishing trust, let us hope that the HSC can help us identify new ways to shape that sustainable future and the dialogue that we need. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Pact for the Future, which carries with it the Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations, reaffirms the global community's commitment to more inclusive, accountable, and transformative systems and approaches that safeguard the needs and interests of future generations. In many ways, the Pact is a call to harness the full strength of our collective humanity, to face down challenges like climate change, maybe the next pandemic, or indeed many other threats that we associate with new technologies. It can challenge us, yes, to understand why we differ on certain issues, but also why we are bound by history to come together to address them. And I end with a very simple adage that may seem so obvious, but in everyday reality right now is seeing the opposite. There is no development without peace, and there is no peace without development. May that very simple but powerful thought guide us in this conference and in the conferences here in Hamburg to come. Thank you so much.
Please welcome on stage the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Olaf Scholz.
Sehr geehrte Herren Staatspräsidenten, sehr geehrte Premierministerinnen und Premierminister, Ministerien und Minister, Exzellenzen, sehr geehrte hochrangige Vertreterinnen und Vertreter von Regierungen und internationalen Organisationen,
of businesses and non-governmental organizations.
sehr geehrter Herr Bürgermeister, lieber Peter,
First Mayor, dear Peter, dear Michael Otto, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to my hometown and a warm welcome to the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. Over the next 2 days, this conference is going to continue where the Summit of the Future of the United Nations in New York starts. There, the international community 2 weeks ago agreed how, together, we can tackle pressing global challenges. For example, the international financial architecture, how can it be shaped in a way so that it can more effectively contribute towards reaching the SDGs? As you may know, Germany and Namibia, together as co-facilitators, negotiated the Pact for the Future. This Pact for the Future was adopted on Sunday 2 weeks ago in New York. And I want to expressly say that this Summit of the Future encouraged me a lot. It reinforced my conviction that we need to find solutions for common global challenges in an exchange with one another, and also that it matters about translating this into concrete action. This is what this is all about, and this is what we are here for today in Hamburg. So with this conference, we want to build bridges from the political SDGs at the United Nations level to the practical implementation. Part of the major challenges of our time are global inequality and man-made climate change. More than 50% of the global population lives in countries where inequality is on the rise. The 5 richest men in the world have more than doubled their assets since 2020, from $405 billion to $869 billion. And at the same time, the entire poorer half of the global population only owns 2% of the global assets. Globally, 1 in 10 person lives in extreme poverty, and at the same time, we are experiencing the impact of climate change everywhere. Disastrous floodings in Western and Central Africa, massive forest fires in Canada, storm surges in the United States, and floods in Europe. All of these are global problems, and they are closely interconnected, they concern us all, and they can only be resolved if the global community works together. So if we show the willingness to solve the problems together, for this we need a dialogue, we need new alliances, new partnerships, and yet we also need the courage to overcome distrust. Platforms like this conference are creating this space outside the negotiations to develop innovative ideas for concrete solutions and to also bring them on track. We are all confronted with the task to lead our infrastructure, the global community, and our business into a resource-efficient, climate-neutral future. And industrialized societies bear a special responsibility. Every individual person has to have the opportunity not to live in poverty, lead a better life. Prosperity for all is a global goal. But this will not be survived by our planet if we still focus on technologies and production methods from the 19th and 20th century. For the global community, this means that we need to replace our fossil fuels by renewables, or not even start using fossil fuels. And there's no way around decoupling the world's necessary economic growth from carbon emissions. And in many countries, this is already happening. We have the solutions, and we also have the technologies readily available. Climate action or development, this is the wrong question in the global north and in the global south. Ladies and gentlemen, together, the international community over the years to come has to bring about transformation, socially, economically, and also ecologically. So socially is the essential principle of the 2030 agenda, which we should never lose sight of, and that is leave no one behind. Economically, we need to develop towards a true circular economy and the joint conviction that growth and sustainability sustainability need to always be thought together. Ecological transformation means that we need to protect our natural resources and also recover them wherever we destroyed them. For all states, this means that climate neutrality and economic activity need to be invested in order to maintain and preserve prosperity. The SDGs were adopted in 2015. We heard about this. And we have made progress ever since. But why didn't we manage so far to make good enough progress? And I see the diverse crises that we are confronted with as one root cause. The progressing climate change, the impact of the COVID pandemic, and the many international crises and conflicts. All of this puts many countries under enormous pressure. One particular setback is the brutal Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Not again, the world should be split up in long overcome blocks. No, the world should grow closer together. Today, 1 year ago, the terrorists of Hamas attacked Israel. They kidnapped Israeli citizens, they raped them, they murdered them. More than 1,000 persons were killed in this barbaric attack. Almost 240 were kidnapped, and many of them are still held hostage by the terrorists. My dear friends in Israel, we feel with you, we feel your horror, your pain, your uncertainty, and your grief. We stand by your side. The terrorists of Hamas need to be fought. But it is also obvious. 1 year of war has brought unimaginable suffering for the Palestinian population in Gaza. The daily experience of violence and hunger is no basis on which good things can grow. People need hope and perspectives if they show renounced terror. And this is why the German government is advocating a ceasefire, a liberation of the hostages, and a political process, even if it seems to be further away than ever today. And still, Palestinians should also be able to take responsibility for their own affairs, taking into account the security needs of the citizens of Israel. These must be respected. Therefore, the aim of this process can only be two states in which Israelis and Palestinians can live in a long-lasting peace with one another. This will only be possible if we manage to stop the spread of political wildfire in the region. The Iranian missile attacks on Israel are yet another escalation in a tense situation. So we, the G7 leaders, have condemned these attacks in the strongest possible terms. Hezbollah and Iran must cease their attacks on Israel immediately. Together with our partners, we will advocate bringing about a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. This is how we can start fully implementing the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which clearly prescribes that Hezbollah has to withdraw from the border region with Israel, and we will still work intensely on this. Coming back to the topic of our conference, the conditions for necessary transformation remain difficult. How can we still improve the situation? Let me mention two essential elements. First, we need to share the burden of crisis management and responsibility for a socially equitable ecological transformation, and we need to shoulder this together. All governments need to shoulder this responsibility, and Germany and European Union are actors that can be relied on. At the same time, we need to extend the circle of those that can make available public funding. For example, when it comes to the future orientation of climate financing at COP29. In addition, we also need to take on board private actors and investors, and we also need to improve framework conditions for private investment, because governments alone cannot turn the tide. Let me say this very clearly. Without the expertise and the investment of the private sector, the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be reached. This is why we need to make sure that we develop common financing instruments so that public and private funds can be brought together more easily. We give the necessary momentum to our race to catch up in order to be able to reach the goals of the 2030 agenda. Here at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, we inaugurate the Hamburg Sustainability Platform, which is a public-private initiative that mobilizes major private investment in order to reach the SDGs. Financial vehicles are going to be standardized, and public and private investment is going to be brought together more easily. In the long run, an enormous investment volume can be generated through this. But at this conference, we are not only going to raise funds. Here in Hamburg, we also want to discuss the question in which areas we can become even better, which would be the cooperation between multilateral development banks, so that with the existing funds, we can already make a greater impact. We also want to foster exchange and also try and make risks in ratings more transparent so that investment in the Global South is facilitated. We also want to find solutions so that in view of increasing climate risks, we can also find ways to handle debt. Secondly, in order to make sustainable progress, we need to use new formats that bring together the expertise of all stakeholders around one table, formats in which politics and business, academia and civil society discuss effective instruments together. And of course, voices from the Global South and the Global North. And I would also like to mention expressly the work of the Climate Club. Here, in the meantime, we have been working with 42 members on cooperative solutions for a transition towards a climate-friendly industry across continents and natural borders, with the opportunity of supporting the countries of the Global South. Let me give you one concrete example, which is also a good fit for the port city of Hamburg. Two-thirds of the goods that are traded globally are transported by maritime transport. And this is why ports play a very important role for export-oriented industries and the supply with renewable energy. But at the same time, there is too little alternative for fossil fuels, especially heavy fuel oil. So that shipping can become sustainable, new alliances are needed. Alliances between governments, fuel producers, ports, shipyards, and shipping companies. This is why the German government, together with the other EU member states, is asking for internationally binding measures. Firstly, the introduction of fuel standards. And secondly, the pricing of greenhouse gas emissions by means of a global greenhouse gas tax. Currently, we have negotiations going on in the context of the International Maritime Organization. What we also need are pioneering alliances. And this is why Germany will advocate green shipping corridors with the Green Shipping Initiative. Specifically, we are supporting an agreement of globally acting companies for a closer cooperation along the entire value chain. At the same time, an agreement will also be launched with the aim of fostering cooperation in the field of technological development, the training of skilled labor, and the transfer of knowledge. And exactly like this, more alliances are needed in order to further foster the use of renewable energies. Alliances in order to enable climate-resistant food systems, to strengthen local value creation and create better jobs with a fairer pay. Alliances in order to foster sustainable mobility. Let me give you one more very concrete example. Batteries will be decisive for the mobility of the future and a functioning energy transition. When extracting the raw materials that we need for batteries, lithium and cobalt, for example, we need to adhere to environmental standards. Together, we need to make sure that the affected and participating citizens, the local communities, can benefit. The Global Battery Alliance is the most important global partnership for this. It is advocating sustainable battery supply chains and also the reduction of the ecological footprint of batteries. At the moment, this alliance is comprised of 170 members, especially businesses from the global north. Here, at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, the German Development Ministry is going to join this alliance together with Zambia and Serbia that have also prepared their accession. The example goes to show, with all the alliances that we forge, we always need to take into account that more people can benefit from progress and prosperity worldwide. And precisely for this, the Hamburg Sustainability Conference was launched. It is making an important contribution towards reaching the SDGs because it is fostering alliances between states and also with business, civil society and academia, and because it develops concrete solutions. And after Hamburg, we will continue preparations for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Spain in 2025 are in full swing. One thing is clear. The race to catch up and to achieve the SDGs is not coming to an end with this. And this is why it is a good idea to have the Hamburg Sustainability Conference as a multi-year process. So what is decided at this conference is going to be implemented and filled with life in the following years. This can only happen if we trust each other and if we see each other as a team and not as opponents. Therefore, make use of the spaces for confidential discussions that are created at this conference. Compromises can best be found when conflicting interests are openly addressed, and you have the opportunity to do so here in Hamburg. Restoring the mutual trust of the international community and showing at the same time that with strong international partnerships we can overcome challenges. This is the goal of our conference. Only with more cooperation we will manage to race to catch up successfully and reach the sustainability goals. And only with this, hunger and poverty and inequality will be reduced in the long run. Only with this, we can bring about a socially equitable ecological transformation. Because this is the joint task of our generation, and I'm inviting you to work on this together. Thank you very much.
So, guten Morgen. I'm Zeinab Badawi. It's my great pleasure to be the moderator of our panel discussion. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Chancellor Scholz, First Mayor of Hamburg, thank you for giving us such a warm and splendid welcome to your beautiful city. My first time here, but certainly I hope it won't be my last. And you have provided this magnificent setting that will, I hope, encourage grand thinking and the realization of grand ambitions. This panel is going to set the scene for our discussions here at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. And Achim, Steiner, we heard you say that indeed there has been progress, but as you know yourself, the United Nations has said that only 15% of 140 of the sub-goals of the UN SDGs, all 17 of them, have actually been achieved or are on track. Only 15%, and that's nearly a decade since they came into force. So clearly, as the Federal Chancellor outlined, there is still a great deal to be done. And as the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said at the UN General Assembly last month, we need to bring multilateralism back on track to deliver. And I hope that that is what we're going to be doing in our discussions over the next 2 days to discuss the breaking down of barriers, which the Chancellor mentioned, between the private and public sector, because we have to make the business case for sustainability, because you can't clap with one hand, can you? We've also got to reduce the gap between rich and poor and between the so-called global south and global north. And although I've lived in the UK all my life, I was born in the Sudan, and so I know all too well that often there is a huge gulf between the global north and the global south, but we have to deliver and make sure that we reconcile our differences. Now, contrary to appearances, I'm much older than I look, and I have been at many discussions like this. We know the recommendations. We are grateful to the Summit for the Future and the Pact of the Future to try to revivify, the recommendations and to set out what needs to be done. But frankly, we need implementation and at an accelerated pace. So we're going to try and put a bit of these discussions out in the open now, and then in your subsequent sessions, you'll be putting a bit of flesh on the bones. Let me invite my panel to come up onto the stage. President Nangolo Mbumba of Namibia, please, if you could take the steps that way. Prime Minister Mottley of Barbados, please come this way. The Managing Director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. Ajay Banga, the President of the World Bank, come this way. And Chancellor Scholz, if you could come back onto the stage to join us. So, good, please, your name is there. President Mbumba, you are here, please, sir. You're next to me here, unless you don't want to sit next to me. President Mbumba is here. I think you're there. You're there, good. Well, we have some musical chairs. Chancellor, you're there. Thank you. Was it something I said? You didn't want to sit next to me? So, good. So welcome to my panel. I hope you'll agree that we have got a great lineup. So we're going to, of course, be focusing on reform of the international financial architecture. President Mbumba, you've been president of Namibia since February this year. And indeed, it's going to be a short tenure for you because there are elections at the end of next month in Namibia, and you'll be standing down and having a well-earned rest because you are a veteran politician. You've been a senior leader of SWAPO, the revolutionary movement that brought Namibia to independence. And you've been a former Minister of Finance and Minister of Education. You're a scientist by training. So you bring a great bank of knowledge and also many decades of experience to this discussion. As Chancellor Scholz mentioned, Namibia and Germany were co-facilitators. Thank you. We're co-facilitators of the Pact of the Future. You have spent months trying to work out the text and so on and negotiating with all the countries. So just give us an overview then, what was said about the necessity of reforming the international financial architecture and future partnerships too. It should be working, just start. Yeah, great.
Thank you very much. First, let me commend the federal government of the Federal Republic of Germany for convening this inclusive dialogue in Hamburg, a city with a long history of serving as a bridge between cultures and economies. The UN Summit of the Future and the adoption of the Pact for the Future provided an international community with a window to strengthen global agreements and institutions to ensure their effective implementation of sustainable development goals. The international system must be equipped to finance these goals and innovate global financial architecture. We cannot talk about renewed international relations and implementation of the Pact if we do not reform the global financial architecture to respond to better needs of the Global South. And talking about the Global South, I think on our part, we should truly concentrate on developing our countries, providing our children with education, our people with health facilities, and the necessary medicine. At the same time, there cannot be, the North cannot save itself, nor can the South solve all its problems alone. And therefore, we need to work together. And I'm glad when we were in New York, a country as young and small as Namibia was coordinating a big program with a bigger and richer and older country like Germany. But we worked together to the point that even Chancellor Scholz was calling me my friend Nangolo Mbumba from Namibia. I hope he'll call me that when we are in Germany. So we truly need to help one another. At the same time, for example, a small country, small economy, of course we have mineral resources. And then you just divide your GDP and then you decide Namibia is richer. That per capita, as it was said by other people here, it belongs still to those who had the knowledge, those who have the skills to get that money. So on Namibia's part, we are happy that German companies are coming to the shores of Namibia with skills, with knowledge, with technology, and willing to work with us. They are not coming with other items I don't want to mention. So we are happy to be here, to participate, and to continue the dialogue started in New York. The negotiations were tough, were difficult. Sometimes people took their country's interest above the interest of the whole world. And that is nearly created problems. But with goodwill from the North, goodwill from the South, it was possible to reach a consensus on the pact. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Let's hope you can breathe life into that goodwill. You say Namibia is small, but it's quite a big country. It's just very sparsely populated, isn't it? About 2.5 million people. Anyway, there we go. Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados. First female Prime Minister of Barbados since 2018. 2022, you got your second term, and you're a very, very forceful presence on the international stage, speaking on behalf of international causes, principally climate change and so on. You're also co-chair of the SDG advocates at the UN. So when you hear, because you're at the UN General Assembly, of course, and you gave a very, very powerful speech, but when you hear what's being said about the reform of the international financial architecture, do you like the mood music? Do you like what you're hearing? And why do you think we need to do something about them in the first place?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And Chancellor Scholz, thank you for this opportunity for the Hamburg Sustainability Conference to add to the conversation. Let me say we're moving in the right direction, but tortoises move in the right direction too. And it doesn't mean they're going to make the destination. Our problem is speed. Our problem is scope. And my fear is that while we are doing some of the right things, unless there's a fundamental rethinking, we are going to be in trouble. I say so because without the distractions of war, without the distractions of the other crises that we're seeing across the world, this would have been a difficult journey. With these distractions, it is now absolutely essential that we think outside of the box to be able to see whether the global financial system can in fact meet the needs. Because if we continue to have countries being marginalized, we then have increased migration, which then causes another problem here, as we are seeing in Europe, and the geopolitics then becomes a toxic part of the conversation. So that I really feel that we need to establish what do we need to sustain the global commons. What do we need to ensure that countries are given their citizens the ability to eat, the ability to have shelter, the ability to have education? Because without those basic things, the ability to have their health protected, without those few basic things, we're not going to make progress. And if we are doing those things and not taking care of the planet in terms of the environment that sustains us and the biodiversity that we need, we're not going to have equitable development. Now, where's the world? These two people here, Kristalina and Ajay, have done an amazing job in the last few years in terms of taking both institutions in new directions. But they can't go any further unless people like myself and the President and the Chancellor start to make the fundamental changes in outlook and in scope. I believe that this gentleman's institution needs to become, in the 21st century, the guardian of the global commons. But he can't do that based on public money alone. He's going to need dedicated other resources, whether it is through looking at a compact with different areas. Those who contribute to the problem must help solve it. And those who are going to benefit egregiously from the solution must leave a little something on the table to help solve it as well. Let's take shipping. You mentioned IMO. Yes, we want to have the ships change into green fuel, but at the same time, some of the money that we can raise from the shipping community needs to go and finance the global public goods to help us deal with the climate crisis and the biodiversity. You have $7 trillion in activity on average in 2022. If you take 1% of that, that's 70 billion a year. You take half of 1%, 35 billion. You split it in three, some to retrofit the ships, some for adaptation financing, a third for adaptation, and a third for loss and damage. All of a sudden, we have a different conversation because it is not only one-off money, it's recurring. Aviation, business travel, first-class travel, private jets, mandatory levies. Economy, voluntary, because the people of the world must be given a chance to play their part as a contribution. And the elephant in the room, fossil fuels and financial services. If we just take those four, we begin to understand how we can have a dedicated source of funding at the very time that all of the G7 countries are talking about fiscal difficulties. Everybody's talking about the fact that ODA is flat and that it is not increasing. And unless we think outside of the box, I do not believe that we're going to save as many people as we should be saving, or save the earth as we know it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Mia. And of course, your Bridgetown agenda in 2022 really offered very practical solutions in terms of how you can reform the international financial institutions in connection with climate change, and you've given us a flavor there of what you think. Kristalina Georgieva, so you've just started this month your second term as Managing Director of the IMF, and you've also had many decades working both as an economist but also in the World Bank, where you were CEO. So you have that privilege of seeing both these major financial institutions up close. But I have to put it to you that you know very well that, not you personally, but the IMF in many parts of the global south is not a particularly popular institution, because when you say you need to have tough, sound economic policies, it can inflict a great deal of pain and lead to unpopular, tax increases and so on. So how do you try to bridge that gap between the agendas of the global south and the global north, which the Chancellor referred to?
Wonderful to be in Hamburg. This is a city when the Chancellor was the first mayor. A very important initiative was born, the Compact with Africa. And the reason I'm starting from that is to say that the path to prosperity requires countries to own it, and then partners to support it, and help sometimes to define priorities. I take pride that actually the image of the IMF has been changing over the last years. I look at some of the leaders here, and it has been changing exactly because we recognize our responsibility to be a truth teller, not to sugarcoat what we see, but also to offer a helping hand to countries to achieve their objectives. So I want to bring to your attention 4 very important directions in which the IMF changes, because the world around us changes as well. Number 1, what is our mandate? Our mandate is macroeconomic and financial stability, growth and employment. Well, when we were first born, climate change was not an issue, but today climate shocks undermine macroeconomic and financial stability, and on the other side of the equation, investing in the green transition creates opportunities for green growth and green jobs. So we embrace this because it matters for our mandate. Number 2, the IMF is very important when the world is in crisis. We are the crisis first responder. When the pandemic hit, we injected $1 trillion in liquidity and reserves through special drawing rights allocation and through lending. But we recognize that responding to crisis, as good as it is, and we will continue to do it, not good enough in a world of more frequent and dramatic exogenous shocks. So we have to also help countries be better prepared, be more resilient to these shocks, and have more precautionary capacity than we used to have. So what do? We build instruments that are actually to build resilience, and I take pride that me and Mottley here represents one of the first countries to benefit from the Resilience and Sustainability Trust we have created. It is today $46 billion strong, and it invests in climate resilience, resilience to pandemics. Number 3, help countries adjust to the world of slow growth and high debt. This is the world we live in right now. And that means relentlessly pursue reforms that are pro-growth in governance, in investment climate, in external sector, in labor markets. And what I can tell you is that when we partner with our members to pursue these reforms, they can lift up GDP growth over 4 years by up to 8%. So it is possible to do better when we unite and work together. And number 4, and the 4 is one that I count on Chancellor Scholz a lot, as well as on Mia and on you, President. Obviously, the fund also needs to change in the way our membership feels included. We just created a 25th chair at our board of directors to represent Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa had only 2 voices. Now they have 3. And we want, by the middle of next year, to see how we can have a formula that reflects better the world of today. But let me say something. I know one very important fact in life. We have our members not because it is charity. We have them because the members get value from the fund. They get the insurance against shocks, they get the policy advice, even if it is tough, they need it. And the result I see in membership terms is our members have grown. Today, the fund has 191 members. The very last one is the Principality of Liechtenstein. So I want to say that we are committed to our members, and we are so happy to see that our members are committed to work with us.
Thank you very much indeed, Kristalina. And I know that the Pact of the Future particularly emphasised the redressing, these historical injustices as they're often seen to Africa. And, we also have Antonio Guterres saying that there should be 2 seats, permanent seats at the UN Security Council for Africa. So hopefully these ambitions will be realised. So Chancellor Scholz, you said in your opening address that we need to have partnerships between the global south and the global north, that actually both spheres have to do, their own bit. And as you mentioned, you were co-chair of this process with Namibia. So just hearing, what's been said by your fellow panelists, tell us a bit more how you think your efforts here at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference can bring about this greater cooperation and strategic partners. And if I may say to you, sir, it's not just partnerships, but it's equitable partnerships that people are looking for. How do you put the equity in equitable partnerships so you don't have this imbalance between the global north and the global south, where the south is cast as the junior partner?
Thank you for your question, and it gives me the chance to underline what I said already in my opening speech. I always think it's necessary to tell everyone in 2050 we will have 10 billion inhabitants on this planet. Some tell us there will be no further growth of mankind, but in the end it is quite a big number. And that this will be a completely different world as the one we knew from the past and as the one we are still experiencing. And equal-footed cooperation is the only way to define this future and to manage to get there. And one of the things we have to be very clear about, especially in the global north and the very rich countries, there will be strong countries between these growing nations in Africa and South of America and in Asia. And not just one, as the debates sometimes are giving the impression. So it is now very important that we start with good cooperation for managing this future. And sometimes it's necessary for us to understand that, for instance, for a country like Germany with 84 million inhabitants, being, due to statistics today, the third biggest economy of the world, is a great luck for Germany. But it is also something that is important to remember when we understand the today's situation. My view is that the wishes we have is further growth in Asia, in South of America, and in Africa, and strong growth. And this means that we have to understand it is necessary to reform financial institutions globally, that it is necessary to help developing these countries today and discussing about the needs and the difficulties the countries face, and that we should not be against growth. Being on a sustainability conference, it is key that we understand it is about growth. And just imagine the world to come would be a world where everyone has the standard of living we had 1950. It is obvious that in the way how we are doing industry today, it will not work. And we cannot define that due to reasons for a good development of the environment of the planet, there will be less cars in Africa, in South of America or Asia, as we have today in North of America or in Europe. They want to have the same standard of living we have today. And this means that the biggest task is developing today the technologies that empower growth, that gives the chance for further growth without harming environment, and with giving a chance that the least developed can be part of the further development. And this is only feasible if we have common strategies and not fighting against each other. And so I'm very happy about the conference. I'm very happy about the Pact for the Future we agreed on in New York, because this is the basis for equal-footed cooperation and a better development of the world.
Thank you very much. I think we're all looking for concrete solutions and so on. You've kind of set your stalls now about why we need reforms of the financial institutions. But let's just look at some concrete solutions. Ajay Banga, you've spearheaded the private sector investment laboratory, which is a collaboration between the World Bank and CEOs of leading banks and asset managers worldwide, because, as we know, you need this collaboration between the private and public sector to deliver the kind of growth that we all want in countries. But just tell us, how can you try to remove the barriers from investment in the global south? Because, there isn't a magic bullet, or is there?
So first of all, thank you for having me. And, it has to be a good morning when Prime Minister Mia Mottley calls me a gentleman in the first sentence when she speaks. That means I'm on the right track, right? So, look, I got elected to this job 16 months ago, and what I was told was that my biggest task was to help get the bank to be better and then bigger, kind of the reform agenda. Much work is going on, but what the whole topic at the end of the day comes back to two issues. The level of funding and financing needed for the sustainable goals. Estimates are we need to put $4 trillion a year. We're talking about net flows roughly, of 300 billion from governments and philanthropy and the MDBs. That's a big gap. That gap is going to need the private sector. First issue. Second issue, which hasn't come up directly, but I worry about it every day, is that 1.2 billion young people in the global south or the emerging markets are going to become eligible for a job in the coming 15 years. Currently, the same countries are on a pathway to generate 400 and something million jobs. Now, forecasts are not destiny, but they will be if we don't do something. And if you have 800 million young people without a job, without clean air, clean water, education, and health when they're growing up, and without a job when they're grown up, then I think today's problems will look like a walk in the park 10 years from today. And so I think there's a sense of urgency as well, to Mia's point, about this. So the private sector is important from both points of view. You cannot generate jobs without growth, as the Chancellor just said. Growth is the ultimate antidote and solution to jobs, but you cannot generate growth without investing in basics, from education, health, climate, and knowledge and capacity, and then putting effort and money into the job multipliers of an economy. That's where the private sector comes in. They are the ones who create jobs. And we have to work with them to make it possible. So what the private sector lab that we set up at the World Bank was aiming to do was a sliver of that, which is, in the case of renewable energy, why is it that if solar and wind per unit is now cheaper than fossil fuel, why is it that money is not pouring into these countries to invest in the generation of solar and wind? And it turns out that we had 15 CEOs from around the world of banks, asset managers, and operators, along with, led by Mark Carney and Shriti Vadera. And we've learned 5 things. The first one is the lack of clarity of regulatory policy and in the countries where they have to invest. If a private investor does not get clarity on regulatory policy, they will not take their money there, particularly when now you have attractive schemes in the Western world, the IRA in America and others, which enable them to get a relatively decent return in a relatively predictable regulatory environment. So I think the gap is even wider than it was a couple of years ago. The second big issue that comes up is, even if they get that, they want political and commercial risk insurance. There the bank can help. We have an instrument that we call MIGA, which is, the bank has many acronyms, but this one is about giving insurance to a private sector investor in a country in case the commitments that they were told they would receive are not met. That's something we can scale up. We've already doubled where we were a year ago. There's more to come. The third is that can we help to take the first loss, meaning take junior equity, so that if a private investor is unable to find the economics to work on a spreadsheet, can we be helpful to take the first loss, the junior equity, so we get them over the edge? We're working on some ideas there to help us get there. That's not an easy one, because if we actually book the loss, we have to go back to our shareholders to replenish our capital. The Chancellor will tell you that is not a joyful circumstance today. So that's an issue we need to deal with. I think we have some good ideas there, including our own retained earnings, but also work with philanthropies. The fourth one has to do with foreign exchange. If you're investing in dollars, euros, and yen in a 30 or 40-year payback project, but you're getting paid in local currency, and you have an unexposed hedge to that currency over 30 to 40 years, that's an unattractive position for an investor. So can we create multi-layered risk methods? Can we create more local currency financing? All the right work on that front. And the last one, which to me is the most interesting as well, and a little longer to build, is can we create an asset class in these categories so that pension money and asset manager money comes in the tens of billions, even if not the trillions, to play. And to do that, you have to standardize loans, work with the receiving countries, create a lot of things around rating agencies. And again, we're working with Standard & Poor's and a number of people from asset managers and banks to help us create that ability. I think all this only works starting with that regulatory policy. And I want to tell you one concrete example. We have made a commitment to reach 300 million people in Africa with renewable energy by 2030 with the African Development Bank and the Rockefeller Foundation. Just to be clear, 600 million people in Africa today have no electricity. And I think of electricity as a basic human right. If you do not have electricity, you cannot deliver healthcare, you cannot deliver education, forget about jobs. And so we have to get this right. To get 300 million people connected by 2030, we have to put a great deal of money to work from our own bank, but also from the public sector, where Kristalina is helping me with the RST to work to create the fiscal headroom for those countries, but then the private sector will be a key player. The first thing required here is the rules of the road from these countries to ensure they're willing to work on regulatory policy. We have a summit coming up in January. A number of the people here from the African countries are going to be present there. That's the kind of thing we're trying to do. Get one by one those 5 things worked on to enable the private sector to come in to create the jobs and fill some of the funding gaps that we cannot fund from public money.
So public money could kind of de-risk some of the investments that you expect the private sector to go in. I should say, of course, as you're American, but you were born in India, and you've also worked extensively in the private sector. You were CEO and chair of MasterCard, and also chair of the US-India Business Council. So I guess you bring this kind of dual vision of both the private and public sector now, as it were, to this discussion. Yes, please.
I don't want to lose sight of something that is very important in the discussion we have today, and it is all of us working together. When we at the IMF look at the policy environment in a country, what can we do about harmful subsidies, how we can improve the performance of the public sector, how can we bring more private investors. We do that hand in hand with the World Bank. We work with the other development banks. And this is something that has always been on paper true, but Zeinab, now it is true in reality. And why is it that we work much more closely together? It's so simple. We cannot waste a penny in a world with so many pressing challenges, and together we make a difference.
But what can you do? Because you know that increasing public debt for many countries scares off investors. Capital is a coward, and they don't want to go in. So what, briefly, can you do at the IMF to encourage this kind of investment for sustainable development?
First, we work with countries where debt levels are prohibitively high, to rearrange the payment structure to get some debt relief coming their way. We ourselves, the IMF, during COVID, we provided $1 billion in debt relief to the 29 poorest countries. So the first thing you need to do is say, you are under water, we have to pull you up.
Okay.
But then comes the second thing. How can we get growth? Because what is the solution to high debt? High growth. You have high growth, you grow your economy.
All paths lead to higher growth. Mia Mottley, you have spoken a great deal about how many countries have to spend perhaps 2/3 of their budget on managing their debt rather than on health, education, climate adaptation, and so forth. So what do you think about what you've heard both institutions say?
I mean, we're right on target, but we need to broaden and to recognize that the complexity of what we face cannot be captured in 60-second sound bites or 4-column inches or a half-hour session like this. Ajay is absolutely correct that the first problem in countries is the regulatory and policy framework. I can tell you from my own country. For the last 3.5 years, we've been managing a very difficult situation with our regulatory agencies who have not been able to step up to the plate to unlock the investment that is ready to come in. And it brings me to the next point, because in many instances, we are also not paying attention to other things like insurance, because if a sector or a country is uninsurable, then it becomes uninvestable. And the reality is that our financial system is premised on access to insurance for persons to manage risk. But we're not taking that into consideration. The third part of it is this. You say to small states that we want you to play your part because collectively, all of us need to go in the direction of renewable energy. It's good for jobs, it's good for investment.
Yeah.
What we forget is that small states don't have the economies of scale, and therefore the unit cost of renewable energy, in fact, may well be more expensive than actual traditional fossil fuels. So how do we balance out the differential if you're asking countries to do the right thing? And then as we talk about growth, let us remember that, as the Chancellor said, the 5 richest people in the world have doubled their wealth. So that growth can't be the metric that we want. It has to be equitable growth in the same way that you made the point about equitable partnerships. So unless there's a fundamental reset in some of the things that we are doing and what we expect, I fear that we're not going to meet the destination that we need to meet for ordinary people. We'll meet it for records and metrics that don't necessarily relate to ordinary people's.
And the money isn't there, is it, frankly, to realise?
The money is there, it's just that
it's not distributed.
It is not distributed fairly or equitably.
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, very, very quickly, Chrissy, I know that you say that there are 2 big giants sucking up all the oxygen.
Yeah. Well, what we face is US, very attractive, safe haven, takes a lot of the finances that are out there in the world. China, also very high debt levels. So what is happening is, before the pandemic, the US had 18% of the money on the go arriving there. Today it is 33%.
So the financial flows are going to these 2 big giants. So I want to bring President Mbumba here. So we've heard Ajay Banga talk about 640 million people in Africa lack energy. You want to make Namibia energy independent. You also want to make Namibia a market leader in the export of green hydrogen. So just briefly set out for us that ambition.
Thank you. What we started with is, about 4 years ago, our late president, Dr. Hage Geingob, caught this idea. And we find that just by location, we have the desert, open place, we have the long coast, long enough, over 2,000 kilometers. And then we have a harbor nearby, lo and behold, called Luderitz, a man who came from Bremen, not far away from here. And then we discovered that Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and other countries around here need green hydrogen. And that's how we came together. We are inviting investors. We have 2 harbors, Luderitz and Walvis Bay. There are companies that are concentrating in this Walvis Bay harbor or Luderitz harbor. And we have attracted bigger company, CMB and other companies from Europe. And we think because of our location, our position, our place in Southern Africa, we will be able to produce enough hydrogen. Out of that, we will benefit by getting enough water, by getting electricity. The work has started already. If you have not joined us, this is the time to do it.
You hear it here, the rallying cry. Chancellor Scholz, Germany is in pole position to be a hydrogen hub. You're a son of Hamburg, and Hamburg, certainly port city, could help catalyse, couldn't it, the decarbonisation of maritime transport, for instance. So briefly, if you would, just on that matter, picking up on the hydrogen issue.
So first, we are the one country that decided to go on hydrogen, which is important for investments all over the world, because if someone is doing this decision in his country, if investors are deciding to invest in a country because of the expectations of exporting green hydrogen to industrial countries, it is necessary that they have some clarity that there is a customer when they have invested millions or billions into what they are trying to develop. And I can assure you, we are one of the countries and we are intensely going into it. We know that for the further development of our industry, electrification is still a big question. And we are increasing our production of electricity, though we have a lot. It is about 800 terawatt that we expect for the end of the decade, and it will, I think, go to 1,500 or something like this in the time to come, because of the industry mostly. But if we look at industry, and Germany is a highly industrialized country, we need some sort of gas, because not everything can be done with electricity. And there comes hydrogen into the game, to say it like this. And we are doing following two courses. First is increasing the production also of green hydrogen in Germany, which is feasible because we have at certain times an overcapacity of electricity for having 100% at every time, 24/7. And this could be used for producing hydrogen. And if I see it right, the new production sites in Berlin and Hamburg, mostly supported by Siemens and MAN, will be the most developed production sites for flexible stacks for producing hydrogen. And we changed legislation to make it easy to get all the licenses for doing so. But on the other hand, we need, and we know that we need the import of hydrogen to Europe and to Germany. Sure. This is why we built the terminals, and why we invited a 22 billion private investment to build a hydrogen grid in Germany, which gives those investors all over the world some assurance that this is a good investment, what they do in Namibia and many other places that have the natural resources for doing it at a cheap price.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We're out of time. I just want to very quickly ask all of you, the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, the Pact for the Future, do you feel that we really are at a turning point to make the implementation of the SDGs at an accelerated pace? Ajay Banga from the World Bank, very quickly.
Look, I think ambition and impact are both very important, and that's why I'm in this job. I'm determined to make it happen. I think conferences like this make us come together on the topic, but we have to get stuff done. Talk will not get it done.
Absolutely. Mia Mottley, briefly. Very briefly. I'm out of time. Very briefly.
The stark reality is 1 in 3 countries literally are only making the targets with eliminating hunger. And I think we're going to have to prioritize, and we're going to have to determine which of the SDGs that we need to do in order to guarantee life. And that relates to hunger, that relates to education, that relates to shelter, and it relates to health. And if we can prioritize those, then the rest will come, but maybe not by 2030.
Thank you. Briefly, Kristalina Georgieva, very quickly.
What the data tells us is that it would cost 500 billion over the next years until the end of the decade for low-income countries to have a chance to meet the SDGs by the end of the next decade. So for this decade, shame on us, we are not where we should be. 500 billion is achievable in the way we were discussing it here. Good. We are $100 trillion world. May we have it in our hearts to put the 500 billion forward so low-income countries get where their people want them to be.
Thank you. And President Mbumba?
I think that
it's working.
I think the basic thing to understand is that humanity must either agree to be one or continue to be divided in groups, fighting one another. And in fighting one another, we will reach nowhere.
Okay, good.
Not at all.
Chancellor Scholz, very quick final word. What do you hope to achieve? Very quickly.
So I just could say I do agree to what was said by my colleagues here on the panel. Let me just add one small aspect of all. the aspects. And this is, we have to discuss about debt of states, we have to find solutions, and this will only work if we do not just stick to the traditional countries that are responsible for giving money to others and possibly have a problem of rearranging the debt of a country, but also the new big countries that are on the scene and gave money to many countries that could not be paid back easily. And rearranging these steps, not just with the Paris Club, but also with the common framework within G20 and some other activities will be key for solving many of the problems.
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you to all my panel. No, stay sitting. So you heard it there, strategic alliances. I wish you well in your discussions, that you'll be able to put some flesh on the bone, as I said, of all these issues, and that you discuss these important global partnerships. Good luck with the rest of the conference. May I ask the media to depart, to go downstairs where there'll be opportunities for photographs later. Please, everybody stay seated until the pin badge holders go into the holding room. A quick photograph for the press here for the family photo. Let me move out of the way.
Come.